It was a clear and commanding day in the middle of the vast, unrelenting waters of the Arabian Sea when the unthinkable happened. An audacious and calculated strike aimed directly at the pride of the U.S. Navy, one of America's most formidable aircraft carriers, the USS Gerald R. Ford, as it cruised in international waters, projecting strength and stability in a volatile region. The behemoth of steel and might, flanked by its escorting destroyers and cruisers, was conducting routine operations in the region as part of Carrier Strike Group 12 when radar operators suddenly noticed something off. A swarm of fast-moving contacts approaching low on the radar, barely skimming the ocean surface. Operating in stealth mode using terrain-hugging techniques to remain undetected until the last possible second. Alarms blared. Sailors scrambled. Command staff took battle positions, and within moments, the warship transitioned from peacetime readiness to full combat alert. The threat was real, immediate, and dangerously close. Intelligence had warned of increasing hostility from regional militant groups backed by state-level actors emboldened by political instability and eager to send a brutal message to the West. The aircraft carrier's defense systems, including the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, Aegis-equipped cruisers, and the ship's phalanx CIWS, locked onto multiple incoming threats that appear to be a mix of suicide drones, anti-ship cruise missiles, and possibly sea-skimming ballistic projectiles, likely launched from both land-based platforms and disguised fishing vessels now turned into weapons of war. Within seconds, the Carrier Strike Group roared to life. The destroyers USS Thomas Hudner and USS Bainbridge moved to intercept, launching SM-6 missiles into sky like lightning bolts tearing through the heavens. The CIWS guns barked with metallic fury, creating walls of fire in the sky. The USS Ford, a technological marvel with advanced electromagnetic catapults and next-gen radar arrays, launched F/A-18 Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers into the air, slicing through the chaos to engage threats before they reached the carrier's protective envelope. The sea boiled with fury as explosions lit the horizon. One drone struck the outer deck of destroyer, causing minor fires but no loss of life, while several others were intercepted mid-air in cinematic bursts of light and sound. The sailors, trained for moments like this, acted with calm, ruthless efficiency. In the air, the Super Hornets quickly identified a launch site hidden along a hostile coastline, and without delay, radioed back targeting coordinates. The USS Ford's battle group responded with the fury of the United States Navy. A volley of Tomahawk cruise missiles surged from the vertical launch systems of accompanying vessels, arcing into the sky with surgical precision, striking key enemy radar sites, launch pads, and command nodes. Intelligence confirmed the targets were linked to a heavily armed militia aligned with adversarial nations aiming to disrupt U.S. influence and freedom of navigation. Then came the second wave, larger, faster, and more coordinated. This wasn't just a rogue assault. This was a sophisticated, state-backed strike operation designed to cripple a symbol of American power. But they had underestimated the resolve and capability of the United States Navy. From the deck of the USS Ford, F-35C Lightning II jets roared off the flight deck, their stealthy bodies vanishing into horizon. These were not just fighters. They were information hubs, data fusion machines, identifying and tracking threats far beyond a visual line, feeding that intel back to the battle group in real time. Meanwhile, the Aegis systems across the group networked seamlessly, creating a dome of coordinated defense unlike anything the world had seen. Even the USS Ford's own electronic warfare systems went into overdrive, jamming enemy frequencies, scrambling incoming missile guidance systems, and hacking drone command channels to turn some threats back against their senders. Below deck, damage control teams prepared for the worst, while on the bridge, officers worked through complex tactical decision-making in real time, weighing response strength against the risk of escalation. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the sea to the port side. An enemy speedboat packed with explosives had gotten dangerously close before being taken out by a Navy SEAL sniper embedded on the escorting cruiser. The psychological shock of such a bold assault was real, but so was the resolve that followed. Naval aviators flying sorties from the carrier struck deep into the heart of enemy territory, targeting command bunkers, munition dumps, and key infrastructure with precision-guided bombs. In one instance, an F-35 pilot tracked and destroyed a mobile launcher that had moments earlier fired a missile narrowly missing the Ford. The pilot's voice crackled over comms. Target destroyed. That's for messing with the wrong people. On deck, the sailors cheered, not out of bloodlust, but out of pride, knowing they were holding the line of freedom on behalf of their nation. Meanwhile, Allied forces in the region, including Royal Navy and French Navy vessels, coordinated with the U.S. fleet, bringing in additional firepower, air coverage, and medical support. The enemy quickly realized they had awakened a sleeping giant. Back in Washington, the president was briefed in the Situation Room, and within minutes, U.S. strategic bombers were ordered to high alert. The world was watching, and the message was clear. Any attack on American personnel would not be tolerated, and the response would be swift and devastating. The Pentagon released a statement reinforcing America's commitment to maintaining open and secure sea lanes, while military analysts pointed out that the attempted strike had likely been planned for months and carried out with foreign assistance, possibly involving encrypted communications and advanced technology smuggled in through proxy states. But they failed to account for the seamless integration, training, and raw determination of the U.S. Navy. As the battle waned and smoke rose in the distance, the USS Ford resumed flight operations, launching recovery missions, providing humanitarian aid to nearby vessels affected by the conflict, and helping stabilize the region once more. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Navy divers recovered fragments of the destroyed drones and missiles, evidence pointing directly to known adversaries. The intelligence community went into overdrive, uncovering a complex web of alliances and black market trades that had fueled the attack. Congress held emergency sessions, while military experts praised the resilience of America's forces. International allies sent messages of support, while adversaries issued denials cloaked in half-truths. The USS Ford, meanwhile, continued its mission, undaunted, unbroken, and unafraid. Its crew became symbols of courage and excellence, their stories reaching homes across the U.S. and the world. Families back home breathed a sigh of relief, proud of their sons and daughters who stood tall in the face of a coordinated assault. In the end, what was meant to cripple American power instead showcased its strength. The world learned a valuable lesson. American aircraft carriers are not just floating airfields. They are moving cities of war, peace, and deterrence. When threatened, they do not retreat. They respond. They lead. And above all, they prevail. The boldness of the enemy may have sparked a moment of crisis, but also ignited the unstoppable machine of American defense. As the sun set behind the aircraft carrier, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the stars and stripes flew high above the command tower, unshaken, unwavering, and undefeated. This was more than a battle. It was a warning to the world. Strike at the heart of American might and prepare to face the wrath of freedom. What followed in the aftermath of the surprise attack on the USS Gerald R. Ford was a full-spectrum retaliation that shook the military balance in the region and sent shockwaves across enemy networks worldwide. As the warship continued sailing with precision and confidence, surveillance satellites orbiting 22,000 miles above Earth were redirected to focus on the origin points of the hostile strikes. Intelligence imagery streamed in real time to the carrier's Combat Information Center, painting a crystal-clear picture of enemy assets hiding under makeshift camouflage in the desert at ports and inside civilian infrastructure in a flagrant attempt to avoid retribution. But America's reconnaissance abilities are second to none, and within hours, strike packages were being assembled. Air wings aboard the carrier were put into full combat readiness. Armament teams rushed to load AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapons NGBU, 31 dams beneath the wings of F divided by a -18S and F-35CS, while mission planners huddled over satellite maps and infrared surveillance, identifying secondary targets in case of decoys. The next morning, under the veil of darkness, dozens of U.S. Navy strike aircraft took to the skies, launching a counteroffensive so precise, so coordinated, and so overwhelming that it would be studied in war colleges for decades. While the battle group remained in full defensive posture, U.S. Cyber Command launched its own digital strike behind enemy lines. With keystrokes instead of missiles, American cyber warriors breached enemy defense networks, shut down radar feeds, disrupted command lines, and fed false signals to confuse and misdirect enemy forces. It was modern warfare in its most lethal and sophisticated form, air, sea, cyber, and space all working in harmony. as bombs dropped on weapons caches and communication centers, and jamming pulses blinded enemy drones mid-flight. The enemy realized they were outmatched, outgunned, and outwitted. But the U.S. response didn't stop there. In the spirit of joint operations, the U.S. Air Force flew in B-2 Spirit stealth bombers from Diego Garcia and Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, flying halfway across the globe undetected to deliver pinpoint strikes on hardened targets that required bunker-busting ordnance. The earth trembled as their payloads hit with surgical precision, sending shockwaves both physical and political through the region. Meanwhile, U.S. Army Special Forces operating in coordination with Navy SEALs deployed to critical areas by MH-60 helicopters from Ford's Air Wing, conducted covert operations, capturing high-value targets involved in orchestrating the original attack. Back in the homeland, the American public watched closely. News channels aired satellite images of fireballs erupting from desert compounds, U.S. Navy footage of Tomahawks launching at dusk, and heart-pounding video clips from helmet cams of Super Hornet pilots as they dropped payloads into the night. The bravery of the crew aboard the USS Ford became national headlines. Stories emerged of sailors saving each other amid incoming fire, of engineers working tirelessly below deck to reroute power during battle conditions, and commanders remaining cool under pressure while guiding one of the most complex combat platforms in history. The president addressed the nation in a prime-time speech, praising the valor of the sailors and reaffirming America's unwavering commitment to defend its forces and allies wherever they are in the world. "Let the enemies of freedom understand this," he said, standing resolute behind the podium. "An attack on one of our ships is an attack on all of us, and we will not back down." The statement was echoed in capitals across the globe, with NATO members pledging support and condemning the attack in the strongest terms. As diplomatic cables lit up, and the UN Security Council convened in an emergency session, U.S. naval intelligence intercepted communications confirming the full scope of the plot. The attack had been greenlit by a rogue alliance of paramilitary groups operating with technological backing from a hostile regime, and they had hoped to test the resolve of American presence in international waters. Instead, they awakened an alliance of steel, strategy, and fury. Over the next several days, U.S. and allied forces maintained pressure, eliminating remaining launch platforms, capturing safe houses, and exposing smuggling routes that had fed arms into enemy hands for years. In one high-profile mission, a Navy SEAL team captured a senior operative responsible for targeting the carrier. He was flown to an undisclosed location where he would face justice, not just for the attempted attack on American forces, but for years of terror financing, human trafficking, and destabilizing activity in the region. The psychological impact of the U.S. response was just as significant as the physical damage inflicted. Militant networks fractured. Regional warlords fled. International smuggling rings collapsed under the weight of interdiction. The message was clear. The United States does not forget, does not forgive, and never tolerates aggression against its defenders. Inside the USS Gerald R. Ford, the crew operated with renewed pride. The flight deck remained a hive of activity. Catapults launching fighter jets, elevators raising aircraft from hangar bays, and sailors working in seamless coordination to keep the ship battle-ready at all times. Chaplains held services to honor the fallen from nearby Allied vessels affected by the skirmish, while medical teams assisted wounded sailors with cutting-edge equipment in the ship's onboard hospital. The camaraderie among the crew was palpable. Young sailors who had never seen combat before were now hardened professionals. Officers who had trained for years had proven their mettle under fire. And leaders up and down the chain of command knew they had done what was necessary, not for glory, but for country. As the Ford continued its patrol, reinforcements arrived. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower joined the formation, bringing with it more strike aircraft and logistic support. Behind them, amphibious assault ships and supply vessels formed a replenishment line, making sure the carrier group could remain at sea for months if necessary. Media outlets began to refer to the event as "The Day the Sea Fought Back," a title that stuck as documentaries, books, and first-hand accounts from sailors began to emerge. Veterans groups rallied around the survivors, ensuring their bravery was recognized not just in medals, but in the annals of U.S. military history. Pentagon analysts described the counteroffensive as a turning point in naval warfare, a modern display of joint force, technology, and readiness. And as calm returned to the waters, something else became clear. This wasn't just a battle. It was a blueprint for how the United States would respond in the age of hybrid warfare, where drones, cyber tools, and asymmetric threats blended into one. And America had just passed the ultimate test. Enemies that once considered U.S. aircraft carriers as vulnerable now reassessed, knowing that each one was a mobile fortress backed not just by steel and firepower, but by the courage and capability of those aboard. The USS 4 became a floating beacon of deterrence once more, resuming joint drills with allies, showing presence in contested waters, and standing as proof that no matter how bold the enemy may be, the United States will never yield its position, nor allow any challenge to go unanswered. The strike may have been intended to cripple, but it had the opposite effect. It unified a fleet, reaffirmed a nation's purpose, and reminded the world that U.S. dominance at sea remains unshakable. As night fell again over the ocean, the ship's radar picked up only calm waters and friendly aircraft on patrol. The sailors, still alert but steady by confidence, stood ready for whatever came next. In their hearts, they knew the truth that echoed across generations of American warriors. Freedom is never free, but it is always defended, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, the USS Gerald R. Ford continued its mission, sailing through volatile waters with unmatched determination, carrying not just steel and ordnance, but the weight of victory and the legacy of resolve. Reinforced by the arrival of additional destroyers and cruisers, the carrier group now functioned as an unbreakable wall of force in one of the world's most contested maritime theaters. The message sent to adversaries was unmistakable. Any future act of aggression against American forces would not merely provoke retaliation. It would unleash a force so devastating, so precise, and so comprehensive that the consequences would be far beyond tactical. Inside the ship's command center, maps were constantly updated, new coordinates were fed into navigation systems, and battle drills became sharper, faster, and more rehearsed than ever. The sailors, now more vigilant than at any point since deployment, found strength not only in protocol but in the spirit of their comrades who stood shoulder to shoulder with them on that fateful day. Promotions were handed out quietly, with commendations from the Secretary of Defense arriving by encrypted transmission. The valor displayed by the crew became the foundation of new Navy case studies, outlining how split-second decision-making, relentless training, and advanced technology had thwarted a disaster and turned it into a defining moment of dominance. But the real power of the U.S. response wasn't measured just in the number of missiles launched or targets destroyed. It was seen in the global reaction that followed. Nations once hesitant to align themselves with American operations now stepped forward, volunteering military assets and offering basing rights. Coalition building accelerated. Joint exercises were expanded. In an emergency summit held at NATO headquarters, key allies echoed the U.S. stance on freedom of navigation and condemned the attack as not just a strike on America, but on global security. In Asia, European and Pacific allies began rerouting their own carrier groups to operate in tandem with U.S. forces, signaling the return of hard deterrence in an era where lines had become blurred. From Tokyo to London, capitals lit up with declarations of solidarity. At home, military enlistment spiked as young Americans watched the events unfold and were stirred to action by the heroism they had witnessed on screen. Patriotic songs blared across sports stadiums. Support Our Troops banners were strung across city blocks, and military families, long accustomed to the quiet nobility of sacrifice, were publicly honored in parades, assemblies, and candlelit vigils. Meanwhile, the wreckage of the enemy's failed operation continued to be unearthed piece by piece. Intelligence units captured enemy drones intact, revealing imported technology, foreign interference, and complex supply chains that stretched across multiple rogue states. Behind closed doors, American strategists revised their playbooks, not only reinforcing carrier defenses, but rewriting how future naval conflicts would be approached. Submarines now traveled deeper and faster. Carrier-launched UAVs were deployed around the clock for continuous overwatch. Laser defense systems, once considered experimental, were now prioritized for rapid deployment. The military-industrial complex responded with speed, ramping up production of next-generation defensive tech and initiating public-private partnerships to ensure that no American carrier would ever face a surprise attack without overwhelming protective capabilities. Engineers from DARPA and Lockheed Martin were flown onto Ford and its sister ships to conduct real-time battlefield innovation, turning lessons learned into hardware upgrades overnight. What was once an isolated incident had become the catalyst for a total evolution in U.S. maritime doctrine. In a classified mission weeks later, U.S. Navy SEALs inserted deep into a remote desert compound discovered a command center filled with documents, encrypted devices, and high-value enemy leaders who had survived initial airstrikes. The operation was swift, silent, and lethal. The compound was neutralized, the intelligence was exfiltrated, and the chain of command behind the carrier attack was shattered. Analysts back home pored over the files, confirming links between the attackers and certain state sponsors, prompting a wave of diplomatic actions, including economic sanctions, frozen assets, and public naming and shaming at the United Nations. American resolve was backed by both firepower and policy, and even nations that once played both sides found themselves reconsidering their allegiances. Embassies that had gone quiet reopened dialogue channels. Military attachés were recalled. Trade agreements were revisited. The world had been reminded that peace through strength wasn't just a Cold War slogan. It was still the currency of freedom. And yet, amid the geopolitical ripples, the USS Gerald R. remained steady in its course. For the sailors, life aboard the carrier returned to a new normal, one sharpened by combat, fortified by success, and bound together by brotherhood. Morning briefings carried more weight. Maintenance crews checked and double-checked every system. Flight ops became more than routine. They became sacred rituals of precision. New recruits arrived, green and wide-eyed, quickly hardened by the stories passed down from veterans who had lived through the attack. The fort itself bore the invisible scars of battle, not in hull breaches or smoke damage, but in the quiet resilience of every bolt tightened, every mission completed, every flag raised. Chaplains continued to offer guidance. Counselors ensured mental health was prioritized. Leadership walked the decks daily, checking on morale and reminding the crew that they were part of something far greater than themselves. As the Ford steamed toward its next waypoint, passing beneath a moonlit sky that mirrored the vast sea below, the sailors stood proud, not just because they had survived an attack, but because they had transformed it into an overwhelming triumph. In the mess halls, jokes returned. In the engine rooms, music played softly over secured channels. And on the flight deck, aircraft were refueled and prepped not just for war, but for peacekeeping missions, humanitarian airlifts, and joint drills that would strengthen the very alliances that had rallied behind them. Veterans who had served aboard the Ford in calmer times sent letters of pride and awe. Families back home mailed care packages with words of encouragement, banners reading Ford strong, and hand-drawn pictures from children who now dreamed of wearing the uniform. Months later, as the carrier pulled into a friendly port for resupply and ceremony, it was greeted not just by local dignitaries, but by American allies waving both their own flags and the stars and stripes. A naval band played, medals were pinned to uniforms, and the ship's commanding officer gave a speech that would echo in the history books. "We didn't ask for this fight," he said, standing atop the deck with aircraft behind him and hundreds of sailors at attention. "But when it came, we answered. And we didn't just defend our ship. We defended every value that this flag stands for. Freedom, courage, and the power to stand up when darkness rises." His words were broadcast around the world, reminding every nation that American resolve at sea was not rusting or fading. It was stronger than ever, powered by tradition, sharpened by technology, and carried forward by the unbreakable will of those who serve. And so, the legend of what happened that day did not fade. It only grew. The phrase, "then this happened," came to represent not chaos or loss, but the moment America stood up with full might and reminded the world who it was dealing with. For every sailor who served aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, the memory of that day would never vanish, but neither would their pride. In the end, it wasn't just an attack. It was a statement, and the response was deafening. Carried on the wings of jets, the keels of destroyers, and the silent shadow of submarines, the United States showed the world that even in the face of sudden aggression, the beacon of liberty remains lit, the sword remains sharp, and no enemy, no matter how cunning, can dim the light of freedom. The sea was silent once more, but the legacy roared on.